On March 8th, Laura and I would part ways at Neal's Gap. As I hugged her goodbye, I felt anxious and slightly overwhelmed. This was it. I was on my own. From the moment I decided to hike the Appalachian Trail, which was on a random day after work during the summer of 2017, all the way up to the moment I set foot on it, I received constant criticism from others about hiking the trail alone as a woman. It was to the point where anytime someone would ask me what my plans were, I almost dreaded telling them about my idea of attempting to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail on my own in March. People made me feel so incapable of achieving this goal that I felt stupid even talking about it to others. There would be the comment, "What? You're hiking the whole thing? Do you even know how far that is?" And when I would reply, "Yes, I plan on hiking all 2,190.9 miles from Georgia to Maine," they would reply with something like, "And who's going with you?" And I would reply, "I'm going on my own." I would internally cringe, as I already knew what they were about to reply with. "What? You're going alone? You're not scared? Are you going to carry a gun? You better carry a gun. What if you get murdered or worse?" That's just a few of the millions of comments that I received for the 8 months leading up to the start at Springer Mountain, and those aren't including the extremely offensive and degrading ones. But nonetheless, here I was, on my own. I had no clue who I would meet along the way or if I would even find a tramley on this endeavor. I just trusted in the process, took a deep breath, and started walking as fast as I could to shake off the nerves. I don't think I even walked an hour before I ran into Kylo. I had briefly met Kylo on the first night on trail at our campsite, and Laura and I would leapfrog with him on the trail throughout the days leading up to Neal's Gap. But we had never really talked up until this moment. He told me he had a trail name now, which was Kylo, and he asked me where my friend had gone. I told him that I was on my own now, and he asked if I wanted to hike with him. So that day we hiked all the way to the shelter together. We had great conversation and got to know a little bit about each other. I was so relieved to have found a friend. Kylo and I would become a team for nearly an entire month. He was my first tramley member of my thru-hike. If you have watched my CDT vlogs, you will know of Kylo. On the Continental Divide Trail, he went by Lido, but he started the CDT with Moosh and I, and we hiked a good bit of the trail together. It's crazy looking back at it all now and how it all unfolded. On our first day hiking together, Kylo and I ended up hiking 11.5 miles from Neal's Gap to Low Gap Shelter. Our plan was to hike a total of 37.9 miles to Dix Creek Gap, which was ironically at mile 69. The days leading up to Dix Creek Gap were short, beautiful, and sunny, while the nights were dark, clear, and cold. March 9th was the day I received my first trail magic at Unicoi Gap, and it was also my biggest mile day yet. We ended up hiking 15.4 miles to Tray Mountain Shelter, where we would camp for the night. March 10th, we had 11 miles to get to Dix Creek Gap. My feet were definitely feeling it that day, for my body was not used to carrying the weight of a backpack and hiking 15 miles. This day was a pretty unexpected and special memory for me. Kylo and I got to camp early that morning, and as we went on our way to get to where we were going, at some point that morning we passed a man who happened to be hiking southbound. When I went to say hello, he asked me if I was from West Virginia. His question took me by surprise, and I immediately looked down at what I was wearing to see if I had anything on that would hint that I was from West Virginia. As soon as I realized I had no West Virginia gear on, he proceeded to ask if I was Michelle's daughter. I was completely shocked by this. Kylo looked pretty confused too. I answered his question with, "Yes, that is my mom's name." And he smiled and told me that we were related. Turns out he was my third cousin. His mother and my great-grandmother were sisters. I was so excited by this. What were the chances I would run into and meet my third cousin in the middle of the woods? He is friends with my mom on Facebook and learned through this that I was attempting to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail. He also happened to be a volunteer trail maintainer for the AT, and he thought there might be a chance our paths would cross while he was out on trail. After parting ways with my third cousin Tom, We headed to the Gap, and about a half a mile west of the trail was the Top of Georgia hostel, where we would take a 0-day and be shuttled into Hiawassee, Georgia to resupply at the wonderful Ingalls. But before getting our resupply though, we had bigger fish to fry. More importantly, it was dinner and beer time at a restaurant with fellow aspiring thru-hikers. The majority of us had scrubs on as loaner clothes because our hiking clothes were being washed back at the hostel. We looked more like off-duty nurses than your friendly neighborhood hiker trash. March 12th, it was snowing as we got dropped off at Dix Creek Gap to resume our hike. I remember seeing a family of 8, 2 parents and 6 children, the youngest being 2 years old, hitting the trail in the snow. I remember the driver that dropped us off telling us that the family was also attempting to thru-hike the AT. I was absolutely amazed and had mad respect for them. Shit, I was 26 years old and I could barely take care of myself, let alone 6 children and a significant other, especially out in the woods. I thought it was awesome what they were doing together. This day we reached our first state border crossing of the AT. We crossed from Georgia into North Carolina. I was so proud that I made it this far, especially when people didn't think I'd make it more than a day out there. When we made it to Muskrat Creek Shelter, 11.8 miles later, we set up camp in the snow to hunker down for the cold night. Thankfully, daylight savings went into effect on the 11th this year, but the mountains of Appalachia were in no hurry to wake up from winter's spell. The next day, we ended up hiking 12.5 miles and climbed up and over Standing Indian Mountain and set up camp at Carter Gap Shelter. I specifically remember this night being extremely cold and uncomfortable. I am not sure what the temperature dropped down to that night, but I was bundled up in every single piece of clothing I carried. I remember curling up into fetal position and shivering until the sun came out. Here is a picture of the weather report for that day, March 14th, and the next few days to follow. The text in the red circle marks the weather report for the 14th. After thawing out from the cold night, we got to move on and climbed up Albert Mountain. Not only would we reach the 100-mile mark of the trail this day, but I would also claim my trail name, and from here on out, I would be known as Sunshine. We ended up sending it that day, a total of 15.9 miles to Winding Stair Gap, where we would hitch into Franklin, North Carolina to stay at Gooders Grove Hostel. A previous thru-hiker named Fossil, who was from the AT class of 1979, was kind enough to give us a hitch into town. Once we got to the hostel, for the very first time, I would sign in my name as Sunshine.